Blame. Now, this is going to be my spoiler-free review for the movie because with this being based on a manga that I've actually read, there are a lot of spoilers that I can give. So I'm going to, save my spoilers for, the actual movie itself and then talking about the manga and some of the differences that it has in there. I'm going to save all of that for my spoiler review, which I'll put a link to in the description once that's completely uploaded. But to get into this, I was super excited. Blame is a manga that finished. I read this. I didn't even realize this when I first went through that manga. But Blame completed 20 years ago, which is insane to me. Like, I read it in 2011. Like, it was my second year of college. And I read through, that was like the second manga I've ever read all the way through. And I did it when I was in like a nerdy manga group. And so we read through the whole thing. I loved it. It's super quick to get through. So if you like this movie, highly recommend you check out the manga. Then I'll get into some more details about that without spoilers. But it's super easy because it's a lot like a picture book. Like, there is so much of just Killy that there's scenes with just no dialogue, and it's just like, here's a panel of a cool shot and like a tiny little bit of Killy just walking somewhere. Here's another couple of panels just like that. You can go through like a page and a half, like every other page and a half or something, and it'll just be like a shot or a couple of panels that are just quick little bits, and it's just him walking from this level to this level, and that's it. Like, for a huge chunk of the manga, it's Killy by himself before he meets other characters, or he'll meet characters and it'll be like, that's the interaction. He met someone for a second and he takes off. So going from the beginning of the film, that's what I thought was going to happen. I thought that it was going to be like a small interaction, but that's not necessarily the case. And I was surprised to see that because that's what I was expecting, because the actual beginning of the manga is somewhat similar to how the movie starts off. But the movie goes into a much different direction by having this story that adds new elements and takes elements from the manga. Like, this is the epitome of when animes make their own endings. That is what this whole movie is. It's even done by the creator, and he even, working on this film of his own manga, changed up the story for this film and like switched some things around. Personally speaking, I was really shocked by that, mostly because I always thought, with it being a manga that I felt you could read through super fast because there's so little dialogue for like the first half of it with Killy, I always thought, yeah, you could totally make that into a 2-hour movie, and it would, to me at least, I thought it would work if they made it. It would have to be a bit more fast paced because it's, the length of a manga, but there's also not a lot of talking. Like, if they did actually what they did in the manga, it would be a super boring movie because it would be like him just walking for a super long time. He would shoot his gun, which is like, every time he did in the manga was just as cool as in the movie, where it's like he just obliterates stuff with this crazy laser gun. And then he moves on, and there's like a bunch of pages of him not talking. There was no like inner dialogue like you see in a lot of other manga and stuff, where it's like the person walking by themselves, like, man, what am I going to do here? None of that crap. It was just, here's him walking, and here's what it looks like as he's walking through it. That was the manga for a huge portion until some of the other characters come along. Now, Shibo, who is like the robot character in the movie, she's a part of the manga as well. The main villain for this is definitely a part of the manga, and everyone else brand new. Like, pretty much all the enemies and Killy and Shibo are like the only things that actually come from the manga, and then the actual, like, the main focus of the story with Killy looking for the net terminal gene. Other than that, all brand new stuff. There are elements that are definitely there, but it's still brand new. Like, the whole village thing in this film, very different than what's in the actual manga. Like, that's not really something that happens in the manga. There are people, of course, but it's not like, oh, Killy is here, and that's a huge chunk of it. Like, that's just not how the manga is at all. It's very much, which they kind of reference in the film at some points, but it's very much like the idea of the different levels is really fleshed out in the manga, because it's like he's going from this level to this level to this level looking for the net terminal genes. This was, when I first saw it, because it'd been so long since I read, I couldn't even remember like if any of the characters outside of Killy were actually taken from the manga. I was like, this story's so different. I don't know if any of these characters are actually from the manga, but I had to look at the names. I was like, okay, yes, they are. So I can't call it a sequel, or not a sequel, but a prequel. I can't even say like it could be seen as a prequel because they actually have the characters and their interactions. So it's more like an alternate universe, which works perfectly for this story actually. But it's like the elements and the concepts are definitely there. It's just very different from the manga. Like the interactions, the way Killy meets Chibo and everything, or Shibo, it's how you pronounce it. Even though it's like Cibo, is pronounced Shibo. Um, but like their interactions, how they first meet, where she is, like as far as her location being like right under the village, and she's, everything that they do with her character. It's very different, totally different from the manga, but all of it was still really good. Like I really loved the movie, and with this not being my spoiler thing, I'm trying to like keep all the actual big points, away and try to mention like random little stuff. But just the characters themselves, Killy, I think they did perfectly. Like he talks just as much in the manga. Like he hardly talks at all, and I'm like, yep, that's exactly what his character's like. Shibo, I think they did an okay job with, mostly because she really is like the second most important character in the manga, and I felt like with them adding in like all these other characters from the village, she didn't really get her time to shine. Like I felt like she hardly had, I can't say she didn't have a purpose because she did, she was definitely there for some important parts of the movie, but I felt like she didn't have nearly enough to do. Even though she did like some of the most important stuff, she still didn't get like the screen time compared to all of like these characters from the village where we get to learn their customs and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, that's cool because they're all new characters, but with her being such an important character from the manga, it was just been really sweet to have seen her do a bit more. Like she really got relegated down to like pinpoint accuracy, pretty much like some of the greatest elements of what she did in the manga. And it's just like, so her being like this important character, companion to Killy. But I just felt like it would have been cool to see more of her. And as far as the action though, really good. Them showing off like safeguards and stuff like that, and the main villains and things, definitely awesome. I thought that was a really cool way to do it. Just once again, very different because it's this experience of humans worrying like, oh, we don't know what we can do and stuff like that. And it was definitely a different experience. It's the post-apocalyptic movies that we're kind of used to, where it's like, oh, it's this group of people trying to survive, and then the hero main character comes along, or the two main characters kind of come along and help them out a little bit. Very different concept compared to the manga, where it's mostly just Killy for like a super long time, and he's this human sort of character, and he's kind of doing his thing. Like as you see in the movie, it's the same as the manga, where he's just hardcore. He's super cool. Boom, shoot a laser gun. It tears through space and time, pretty much wipes everything out, and he's just like, all right, next thing to do. So it's definitely like that, but they add that concept of this is what's difficult. Like for Killy, he had a challenge. Towards the end of the movie, they have their grand epic fight sequence, but for the most part, he was just as good as he was in the manga, where it's like there's no true challenge for him when it comes to like the regular enemies. But for the human characters, that's where it kind of upped the ante. It was like, okay, there's a lot of characters here. Not everybody's about to make it. So definitely added to some suspense that's definitely not there in the manga, because these human characters like don't really exist in the same capacity. Like they're kind of there passing a little bit manga wise, but in the film, this village takes center stage. So I thought it was cool. It was definitely a twist on the story. It's a completely different story. Honestly, it really is like an alternate universe version of Blame, because the characters are there and the main concept is there. Like we have Killy. He's going for what's known as the Terminal gene, and it's basically to stop the post-apocalyptic world. That's pretty much like his whole goal, is to save humanity. And that's the story of the manga as well. But he doesn't have like this great big stop where he's like, I gotta help this village, and he comes across somebody else and is like, all right, let's all team up and do this thing. It's not really like that. It's kind of like that just a little bit as you go through the manga, but it's definitely not like he comes across this village and saves a bunch of people. So it was definitely interesting watching it, where it's like, it's so weird to see this character, and it's just like, a lot of different things, like, anime having different endings, but normally there's at least some stuff where it's like, that was straight out of the manga. None of that was really here outside of the visual representation of, the characters really, and him like shooting the gun. So it's kind of funny, but it's like, yeah, it's so drastically different. And this movie is getting a sequel as well. I heard that it's getting a sequel, so I'm very, very curious what they're going to do, because once again, without spoilers, but the way that this movie plays out and how he goes about, fighting villains, and how the heroes work together, and how their relationships are ultimately said and done, by the end of the film, how everything is completed, very different. And I'm like, all right, well, that totally changes, like timelines around and things like that from the manga. And I don't hate it or anything like that. Like, I still really enjoyed this movie, but there's so many differences, and I just want to kind of talk about that, which I have to get more in detail with that in the spoilers. But it's just very interesting going through it. It's like, man, this is so incredibly different. More talking, probably more talking in this movie than like the entirety of the manga, or it's got to have like a huge percent. I wish there was someone that already knew the math, but if you took all this dialogue, just all the characters, all the dialogue together, and compare that to the entire manga of Blame, I would love to know the actual percentage that it takes up from the manga, because I'm like, there's so much where I was just like, click, 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 because it's just a bunch of pictures of him walking. So I would love to know that. It would be pretty funny, but really good movie. Highly recommend it. If you like action, it's very Matrix-like. It's definitely Matrix-like, except instead of them going into the Matrix, it's just all the crappy parts of them fighting the Sentinels and stuff. Like, it's just that, and it's dangerous all the time. So if you like that part of the Matrix, but you want to see it as like the whole story, and definitely darker, this is definitely the movie for you. If you like sci-fi in general, action, all that stuff, I think is done really well in this. And it's, taken from a great manga. Like, the manga is great. It does all of that very well, just very differently. So if you really like this, I would personally recommend the manga just because I really loved it and I was excited to see this. And it's so different, but I still love both. I definitely love both. Maybe it's just a soft spot, but I would prefer the manga, but that's also because the manga was first and that's the original story. And it also has a special place because it was like the second manga I ever read all the way through. So there's multiple elements there, but I also like the story because it was so different. Like, this was, I hate to say generic, but it was definitely more normal than the manga itself, because you would have stuff where, like I said, it's just so much of Killy by himself, not even talking or in any inner monologue. It was very different than anything I was used to, even to this day, from all the manga that I've read, since that point, manga I've read, anime I've seen, it's still very different. There's so few manga I've ever seen where it's like you have a character walk and there's no dialogue whatsoever. There's no inner monologue or anything, or any text to be like, this is what the character did. There's nothing. It was just a picture and he walked, and that was it. So even to this day, Blame, I think, is an insanely unique manga that you just don't get that sort of storytelling where it's like, yeah, the character doesn't talk. He doesn't do the inner monologue. He doesn't really talk with people. He comes across people, he'll say basically what he says in the movie, like, this is what I'm doing, I'll help you, no problem, and then he moves along. So very different. Like, if you do go to the manga, it'll be a different feel. That's, I think, the best way I can possibly explain it. Like, you'll still get that same concept. It'll be slower because, of course, this was like, to pack everything into like a 2-hour movie pretty much. And that's, of course, a manga that, it does have an anime. If you go back to the 90s or whenever it was, I believe it has like a 6-episode anime. And I remember seeing that a long time ago. I never watched it, but I remember seeing it even exist. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. So I was surprised when this came out. I was like, okay, there are like 2 versions of Blame now. And this one, I had no idea how that old anime really tells the story or anything like that. So I don't know if that sticks truer to the manga than this does, or if that old anime was a precursor to this, 3D movie and how they do it. But still love both for sure. But I would definitely recommend checking out the manga if you want like the full story, because this doesn't even conclude. I mean, I guess that's not a spoiler really, but that terminal gene, like, that's not really a part of the movie when you really think about it. It was just like, that's what I'm looking for, and then nothing happens. There is a sequel to basically focus on Killy searching for the net terminal gene, and I'm curious how that's going to play out because of the way they've shuffled characters around in their interactions, and this movie being the first time they met compared to, the way that they met the first time in the manga, drastically different. So I'm definitely looking forward to that and what they decide to change, what technically they may have to add, which I, like I said, I can't get into spoilers with that, but there's some elements where it's like they technically have to add something here because of what they did in the movie. So definitely looking forward to how the sequel's going to play out, but this is definitely a fun movie, definitely entertaining. I love the action. I like all the characters. I thought it definitely captured Killy perfectly because he just doesn't talk and then he kills things and it's cool. So I was like, yeah, that's what he does. So, excuse me, that was done perfectly, but really looking forward to what they do with the sequel. Of course, we'll love to know what you guys thought about this movie, so please comment below. Let me know your favorite parts about it, your least favorite parts about it. Like I said, my spoiler discussion for this will, of course, go through like all the details of the movie, But my main reason for doing two separate videos for this, I always do it for movies, but normally when it's like a little thing like this, I'll do one. But because I read the manga, I was like, I have to do a spoiler discussion because there's so much I want to talk about of like what I like from the manga that wasn't in the movie, what I like from the movie that wasn't in the manga, and I'd be spoiling like so much stuff. And I'm gonna try not to spoil too much for the manga for anyone that hasn't read it. I am gonna give like vague details of that, but I'm not gonna spoil like this is exactly what happened in the manga compared to the movie. So it'll still be spoilers for the movie, but I won't like ruin the whole manga so you can't read it. So if you still want to check that out, like I said, just follow the link in the description. Like I said, we'd love to know what you guys thought about this movie. If you have read the manga, you can just make sure you put a spoiler tag if it's explaining details of the manga or the movie, or just hop over to my spoiler discussion and put all the stuff there. But thanks for checking this out. Like I said, want to know what you guys thought about it. Definitely check out the manga. It's a different feel for sure because it's not kind of all these characters and all this dialogue. It'll be very different. I would love to get someone's experience on that who saw the movie first and then went to the manga and had that experience. It was like, wow, it's so detached from like humanity. It really is detached from humanity. I think is the greatest way to put it. This is like, oh, humanity is crazy, and we get this experience of people that have lived underground, or I think that is the surface of the planet. It's just a bunch of levels now, built like I guess all the way out to the atmosphere. They don't really explain it. It's just a million different levels, and that's pretty much it. I would love to get someone's perspective on that, like what they felt about the movie, and then going to the source and how detached it is from like contact. I think is very interesting. I would love to see a video about that or just hear someone's experience with that. So if you have that experience, would love to read about it. But either way, would love to know what you guys thought about this film. So please put your comments down in the comment section below. And of course, thanks for watching.